So you think you know what happens behind bars. Yeah, Hollywood gives us one picture, but the reality? It's way more complex, and honestly, often a lot more disturbing. We're talking secret survival codes, the mind-boggling economics of the whole system. We're about to blow past the fiction. Let's dive in and uncover the real story of prison life, using the hard facts. First, we're going to get a handle on the immense scale of it all, just by looking at the pure data. Then we'll zoom right in on the unwritten rules for day-to-day survival. From there, we'll go global and see the wild extremes in prisons around the world. And finally, we'll get into the really complicated moral questions that exist beyond the cell door.
All right, first up, the system by the numbers. To really understand what happens inside a prison, you first have to wrap your head around the sheer scale of it all.
Okay, so you often hear the official budget for the U.S. prison system is around $80 billion. But that, it turns out, is just the tip of the iceberg. When you start to factor in all the wider costs to society, things like lost wages for inmates' families, the cost of foster care for their kids, the impact on public health, well, some estimates put the true annual cost closer to this staggering number, $1 trillion.
Now, you might be surprised to hear that the U.S. prison population has actually gone down from its peak of 2.3 million people back in 2008. But even with that drop to 1.9 million, you have to understand the United States still holds one of the highest incarceration rates in the entire world.
So who exactly is in this system? Well, the demographics show some pretty significant disparities. While white inmates make up the largest percentage, Black Americans are incarcerated at a rate that is way out of proportion to their share of the general population. And the gender split? It's even more stark. Over 93% of the entire inmate population is male.
The data on how people die in custody is just as revealing. In state and federal prisons, the leading causes of death are often what you might expect: health issues like cancer or heart disease. But look at local jails. The leading cause of death there is self-inflicted. And the most tragic part of this statistic, so many of these deaths happen before the person has even been convicted of a crime.
Okay, so now that we've seen the big picture with all the data, let's switch gears. We're moving from statistics to the visceral, day-to-day reality. Forget what you've seen in the movies. Survival on the inside is governed by a strict, unspoken code, and the consequences for breaking it, well, they can be absolutely brutal.
This right here is the essential playbook. Rule 1. See nothing, hear nothing. Period. Don't offer up your opinion unless someone asked for it, because that can get you into deep trouble, fast. Snitching? That's the absolute cardinal sin. And this one is crucial. You have to project strength. And finally, avoid debt like the plague. Don't borrow and don't lend. It just makes you a target. It's this constant mental chess game, trying to navigate physical threats and fragile alliances.
This quote from our source material just sums it up perfectly. Standing up for yourself is completely non-negotiable. I mean, even if you lose a fight and end up in the infirmary, you've sent a clear message. You are not an easy target. It's a brutal, but for many, a necessary calculation for survival.
And when those fights do happen, the ingenuity can be, well, it's terrifying. Inmates become absolute masters at turning everyday items into deadly weapons. A simple combination lock inside a sock, that's a bludgeon. A plastic spoon ground down on concrete over time becomes a shiv, a homemade knife. Even candy, like Jolly Ranchers, can be melted and molded into a razor-sharp point. And this isn't always about aggression. A lot of the time, it's about a desperate need for self-defense.
To really understand the absolute worst-case scenario, we have to look at some extreme examples. The murder of Luis Romero is a truly chilling case of what can happen. His cellmate, a self-styled Satanist, used a razor blade to mutilate and decapitate him, and even made a necklace from his body parts. It's a gruesome, horrifying reminder of the profound violence that can just erupt within those walls.
Now, it's easy to think all prisons are basically the same, but the reality is a world of extremes. So let's zoom out for a minute and see how different countries approach incarceration, from philosophies of rehabilitation to pure hard punishment.
On one end of the spectrum, you have a place like Bastoy Island in Norway. They call it the world's most humane prison. Inmates live in communities, they have access to things like saunas and TVs, and the whole focus is on preparing them to rejoin society. And then, on the complete opposite end, you have the Muhanga facility in Rwanda, infamous for horrific overcrowding, abuse, and a near total lack of basic human rights.
And the scale of these places is just as extreme. Take the new Bilibid prison in the Philippines. It's the most overcrowded on Earth, cramming over 28,000 people into a space that was designed for less than a quarter of that number. Then, you have Sark Prison, on a tiny island between the UK and France. It was built back in 1856, and it has a maximum capacity of just 2 people.
All right, in our final section, we're going to look beyond the violence and the statistics and get into the complex, morally gray areas of prison life. We're going to explore some surprising therapy programs and a very controversial legal loophole that fuels a massive, hidden workforce.
And this brings us to a pretty fundamental question, right? Is the whole system purely about punishment? Or is there actually room for rehabilitation, for therapy, maybe even for acts of altruism? The answer, as you're about to see, is complicated.
Believe it or not, some truly unexpected programs exist out there. In the UK, some long-term prisoners care for birds as a form of therapy. Here in the US, there are programs where inmates train service dogs for military veterans. Italy has a medium security prison with a literal fine dining restaurant that's run by inmates. And then there's this one, which is just jarring. The infamous serial killer Edmund Kemper recorded thousands of hours of audiobooks for the blind, all from his cell.
But then there's the other side of inmate work, prison labor. And a powerful real-world example is in California, where thousands of inmates fight on the front lines of deadly wildfires. They can work grueling 24-hour shifts, risking their lives for pay that can be as low as $26 a day.
So how is this even legal? Well, the answer is kind of hiding in plain sight in the very amendment that abolished slavery in the first place. Listen closely to this crucial exception. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist. That little clause, that exception, is the key. It creates a constitutional loophole for what is essentially involuntary servitude as part of a criminal sentence.
And this brings us right to our final and maybe most provocative question. When you consider the constitutional loophole and the reality of inmates working for pennies on the dollar to produce everything from military jackets to dentures, is this system a form of modern slavery? It's a question that forces us to confront the deepest ethical conflicts right at the heart of the prison system. So what do you think?